What's going on, y'all? KM Best here, your favorite 69th ranked Marvel snapper. Yes, I am back in the top 69, and I want to talk about 5 decks that I think are good after the big OTA changes. Number 1 on my list, and this should surprise exactly nobody. This is the list I took to Infinite after the patch had already come through, so I didn't really feel like climbing before all the patches came out, so I was like, all right, we're going to do this after the patch. And this is the Loki deck that I put together. It's a lot like Lambie series' Loki list, and the reason I moved towards this and away from my Quinjet Loki list is because I thought there would be a decent amount of Mobius coming back into the meta, and if I was to play against a Mobius, I would rather do so with a Beast, which at least, still puts cards back in your hand. It's not the end of the world, than with a Quinjet, which is actually just terrible if your opponent has Mobius. So I moved towards the Beast style of deck. That said, I am a firm believer that Elsa is not a card you need in this list. She conflicts too heavily. So I tried Angela, and I eventually ended up on Jeff, just because it kind of goes there at this point. So what I'm looking at right now is this list, which is, I would say, a 10-card core. And then Jeff and Rogue are your tech slots. You can really fool around with whatever you want to put in those slots. I think there's a lot of different options. Rogue here is out of deference to the vast numbers of Miss Marvel decks, and I will say that one of the reasons I like this list so much is I think it has an incredibly favorable matchup into those Miss Marvel decks. Not even necessarily because of the Rogue, but because they are full of good curve plays, and you should, as a Loki deck, actually pay attention to your ability to play their Miss Marvel, because it will come up both off of Rogue and off of Loki. So do please keep that in mind. It is definitely worth keeping in mind. And I think this is not necessarily, guaranteed the best deck, but an early front runner for the best deck, because what I've seen out of the meta so far is not a lot of Mobius. I just have not seen a lot of Mobius, and I have seen a lot of decks that this deck is good against. And I think until people find a way to make that 3-cost Mobius actually playable, there might actually be some trouble in terms of, man, is Loki gonna be the best deck again? Next up is a list from a buddy of mine, W Snapping, and this is, I think, my favorite build for Miss Marvel herself. I'm seeing a lot of Darkhawk stuff that is, very, very reasonable, very, very powerful, but I think I like this one just a little bit more, and this is a lockdown style deck that uses Miss Marvel as an effective second claw. This is a list that is kind of W's baby. He loves playing this kind of stuff. It actually started out as a Guardians deck. Now, one of the things that you'll notice that's different is he had Mr. Fantastic in his list. I actually test and talk with him a fair bit, and I am convinced that Nightcrawler is a little bit better. And then when he actually posted his Infinite Climb, he mentioned that, sometimes Nightcrawler came in for Mr. Fantastic. When I played this list, I found that Mr. Fantastic was kind of doing nothing. It's a 3/6, but you're never really winning one of those side lanes by Mr. Fantastic diff, if that makes sense. You have so many things that put way more power onto those side lanes, to the point that when you play Mr. Fantastic, it almost feels superfluous. You're almost never actually using it to its full potential because you have so much ability to go wide like that. Now, one of the other cards you could try in here is Vision, which I had in here when I played it, but 3 5s was just too much. It's just too heavy, and it sort of detracts from the riskier but more rewarding plays that you kind of have to make with a deck like this in the form of Professor X. Now, I do want to address Daredevil. I did lose one game because I could not click on my opponent's cards. I do not know if they have fixed that. I kind of don't think they have. I don't actually know if the OTA had the capability to fix that. But I am fairly comfortable at recognizing all of the variants in the game. And Daredevil, just to make your Professor X work better, is definitely worth it here, especially in the context of being a Prof X Alioth deck. It's almost Thanos-less Thanos. That said, if you don't want to be playing with nerfed Daredevil, I would not necessarily be opposed to you cutting it for another 2-drop. I do want to say, just for context, for people who don't know, normally Daredevil lets you click on the card that you see and actually get to see the full thing. Now he's just showing you his like red vision of it. You can't click your opponent's cards to see them. You just have to guess what they are based on the artwork, which you do get to see. Since I play a ton of Marvel Snap, it's relatively easy for me to do. Next up is Classic Destroy. I think it is one of the best decks in the game right now. There's not a lot that interacts with this list profitably that is being played right now. Things like Cosmo and Armor are kind of not being around right now. Nobody really wants to play new Mobius at his 3 cost, and that means that this deck can thrive as long as you are able to understand that this is a deck that needs to roll downhill. And when this deck rolls downhill, it's borderline unbeatable. When you start doing things like Forge into Deadpool, Nico the Deadpool on turn 4 to draw the card, like, it's so broken. Like, you get like, okay, Forge into Deadpool, Carnage, play Nico, Deadpool. It's seriously messed up. Like, it's seriously messed up. And the fact that Nico drawing 2 is so strong in this deck is not just because, you know, the obvious destroy trigger draw 2 is broken, but this deck needs specific cards at specific times. Nico speeds that up. It's so gross. You can use her to duplicate your Venoms too. You can use her to kill your Deadpool, your X-23. You can get a second Deadpool. You can get a second Death. She's dumb here. She's awesome. And I think this is a deck that, especially in early seasons when people are like, I'm going to play around with the new card, you can ruin their life. Like, you can ruin their life for even thinking they deserve to have fun with a new card when you get to put 60 power on the board. There is one person I trust when it comes to what Shuri deck list to play, and they are the player on ladder named Shuri Enjoyer. They're a Brazilian player. They're extremely good at this deck, and this is what I believe they are playing right now. And I, like, for the record, like, whatever they're doing with this deck, I trust them. I'm in the business of trusting one tricks with what they're doing, and I 100% trust it. So what we have here is the Echo, right? The Echo is the main change that's going on right now. Echo extremely strong against Miss Marvel because, say it with me, Miss Marvel is very predictable. That said, you can just jam an Echo out there in the middle, and the whole Miss Marvel deck is like, oh, geez, I don't really know what to do about that. It's really powerful. When I was playing Miss Marvel, someone played an Echo against me, and I was just like, oh my god, my whole deck sucks now. It's even better against Darkhawk decks. It prevents Professor X from being played in that lane. There's just so much that it's good against right now. And it is a very powerful addition, especially to Shuri, because Shuri actually tends to be a little bit weak to Professor X, because the kind of things that Professor X does, it's like, all right, can I catch them with a prof on the turn they're playing Shuri? You can kind of narrow it down a little bit more by using Echo to prevent a prof being played somewhere. It's a very powerful thing to do. Echo is very strong right now, but I mean, if you don't have Echo, feel free to play Enchantress. It's honestly not that much worse. You could argue it'll even end up being better because of the amount of Darkhawk in the meta and because no one's really going to expect that out of you right now. Still, I think this is as good a time as any for Echo to be a relevant card, and of course the rest of the deck is pretty much the same. You'll notice that the top end is America Chavez instead of Eliath. I feel like that's just like a safety choice, where my goal here is just, all right, look, I don't know what I'm teching against specifically, and if I don't know what I'm teching against specifically, like with Eliath, which was there as a specific answer to like Shang-Chi and Shadow King, if that's not around that much anymore, I don't need to be running last month's tech in this month's meta. So we're back on the Chavez, but if you run into all the stuff that the Eliath was there for, feel free to put Eliath back into the deck. One of the things that I noticed on my climb was that there was just a dramatic lack of any kind of Mobius and Mobius, and that was the real reason why I would have wanted to go away from this deck in the first place. I lost multiple times to a very talented player named Sterek playing what I'm guessing is just about this list, you know, plus or minus maybe 1 or 2 cards. And he was very good at doing some specific things in order to make my Lokis very unprofitable. So the first thing is that Black Widow is a legitimately decent card against Loki now. It used to be a lot riskier to play Black Widow on any turn that wasn't 2 because they would just Loki it away. Now, since you know Loki is only coming down on 4, you're going to be able to get them to give up a draw regardless. Second, don't be afraid at this point of just jamming a Darkhawk out there and saying, look, this is my big guy, and I'm going to put you in a position where you answering my big guy means you lose the other 2 lanes. That's one of the things I learned about the matchup from losing those games. I was really impressed with how this deck was able to perform against Loki. I remain impressed with how it's able to perform against Loki. And if people aren't playing Mobius, I think this deck could be a legitimate sleeper contender. Because one of the things about this deck that like makes it worse than Loki into Mobius is that this deck is actually counting on that beast debuff a lot more than the Loki deck is. The Loki deck, it's like, all right, you know, it's cool if I get the beast debuff, but it's not key to my game plan. This deck, it's like legitimately, it's pretty important to get like a second Korg for free. It's pretty important to get like all these points. It doesn't have the margin for error that a Loki deck can have. So I do think the more Mobius there is in the meta, the more worried I am about being a beast reliant deck. And I'm more worried about this deck than I am about Loki. All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that look at 5 decks that I think are pretty damn solid going into the new metagame, the brave new, potentially Shang-Chi-less world. I can't wait to see what happens. I'm really excited to see what people come up with. If you have a deck that you're confident in, please leave it in the comments below. As always, I read every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching, making it this far. As always, I've said that like 4 times in this outro. I suck. I have been KM Best. You have been phenomenal. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next one.